Now, I mentioned last week that I thought the wheelchair tennis champion Dylan Alcott was a great choice as Aussie of the Year. And of course, because of the debate about Grace Tame, mentioned, of course, it's fine for the Australian of the Year to advocate on their causes. That's what we expect from them. We just don't want them to be partisan or rude. Anyway, it didn't take Dylan Alcott very long to actually advocate for the cause of the disabled. Have a look.
We've got to fund the NDIS first and foremost and listen to people with lived experience and ask them what they need so they can get out and start living the lives that they want to live. And remind ourselves that it is an investment in people with disabilities so they can get off pensions and start paying taxes.
Now, of course, we all want the disabled people living with disabilities to get all the help and support they want. But of course, whenever you establish any massive government scheme that hands out money, it is vulnerable, obviously, to rorting and over-servicing at times. Now, psychiatrist and commentator Tanveer Ahmed has written about this in the latest edition of the Spectator Australia, and he's talked about some of the problems in the NDIS and even identity politics playing a role in this. Thanks for joining us again, Tanveer. Tell us how identity politics could be causing problems of a financial nature for the NDIS.
Chris, great to be with you. Look, I guess any aggrieved sector that wants more resources, identity politics is attractive because I think the public, proclamation of attention or pain confers a degree of status, particularly in the competition for resources. Now, I agree with you. I think Dylan's a great choice, Dylan Alcott. And I think, look, disability is actually, I'd love him to better communicate the very notion of disability, because I think we think, it's someone in a wheelchair, but the very idea of it has changed over recent decades, and it's really about having some sort of chronic disorder that's stabilised. You're getting certain elements of treatment, or which is fairly regular and not necessarily changing so much. And the idea of disability is really to perform your social roles, mainly in work, relationships, those kind of things. You need extra resources to allow that. And that's really what NDIS is about. And I think fundamentally it's a great idea. So it's a triumph of inclusion. And that's where it's part of the broader identity politics movement. You've got minority groups, whether it's about race, gender, and in this case, it's about the disabled. But what I don't think is clearly communicated is all the growth, the vast bulk of the growth in NDIS is increasingly in a lot of these greyer disorders, and it actually reflects the disability pension at large. The disability pension up to 2013 almost tripled in terms of the number of participants. And it was largely in psychiatric grounds, Chris. And this is the very interesting trend you're getting in this huge sector, and it's actually happening across the Western world, and possibly Australia is leading that growth with the NDIS, which is approaching Medicare. It's approaching $30 billion of a year, Chris. I mean, it's an extraordinary growth and way beyond expectations. And much of that growth, and this is what I'd love Dylan Alcott to try and scrutinise, is in psychiatric disturbance. I mean intellectual disability. I mean chronic mental health disorders, even behavioural disturbance. And what I'm alluding to in this piece, there's a challenge when you're seeing people who fall into these categories. And especially when you're not responsible for you're not holding the purse. The money's coming from the federal government usually, and it's not from your medical department. So whenever there's a grey area and people, wanting NDIS and potentially helped by NDS, it's very difficult to kind of push back. It's much easier to go, okay, look, yeah, we'll try and get it for you. And what I'm really arguing is part of identity politics, it almost became attractive to, vouch a degree of victimhood, whether it was in race, gender. But I think there's a component of that in disability now. Particularly, there's a tension at the bottom end of the labour market for people who might potentially, with a bit of a push, a bit of resources, be able to access the labour market. They might struggle for good work for a little while. They might have to do tough work for 6-12 months. In that group, I actually think the identity of disability is becoming more attractive than the idea of precarious work. And I think there's a tension there. That's really what I'm alluding to.
That's a crucial issue, Tanveer, because we used to talk about there was a problem with the long-term unemployed looking to get onto a disability pension because it was more money and they could just sit there. one of the promises of the NDIS would be, more resources, more support, but hopefully helping people with a disability get into the workforce. Obviously benefits for them out of that and benefits for the community as well. Is that happening?
Well, certainly not yet. And I'm not sure incentives are designed that way for it to happen. Look, I really hope so. And that's certainly my aim. Look, one concept I would bring up here, Chris, there's this idea of early reward. Now, often the problem with things like the disability pension actually overlaps with addiction too. Getting a rough job is often a path to getting a better job, right? But that can take 12, 18 months, 2 years. It can take years. Likewise, in addiction, you have to do certain hard work, and it might take 6, 12, 18 months for you to really start reaping the rewards. Whereas if I get a hit from a drug, or if I start on a pension and start getting payment, that's an early reward. I think what we're missing is a better sense of early rewards for people trying to do the hard work of actually trying to do work, get out of disability. Look, the vast majority of people actually do want that. They want the satisfaction of work.
Of course, yeah.
I also think we're not giving
provocative stuff,
dignity.
Tanveer, I'm going to have to wrap it up. Thanks very much. Provocative stuff, a difficult issue. Yeah, we've got to look after people. We've got to get this system operating effectively.